Your sister doesn't want to see you this Thanksgiving. Don't come home. It took my mother only one sentence to erase me from the family, as if 27 years of being her daughter had never been enough to keep a place for me at the table. My name is Alina Mercer. I was 27 that year. I was standing in the tiny kitchen of my third-floor apartment, still wearing my work flats, purse hanging from one shoulder, phone pressed against my ear like I could somehow squeeze a different answer out of it if I stood still enough. I remember every detail. The dim yellow light over the sink, the hum of the refrigerator, the paper grocery bag on the counter with the apples I'd bought for a pie, the candle I'd picked for my mother, the expensive coffee beans I'd bought for my father because he always said store-brand coffee tasted flat, a little knitted baby sweater for my sister, Vivian Mercer, who was pregnant and, according to everyone in my family, carrying not just a baby but the emotional stability of the entire house. I had been planning the holiday in my head all week. I would arrive early, help set the table, offer to wash dishes before anyone asked, laugh at the right moments, stay out of the way, be useful, be pleasant, be smaller than whatever tension might already be in the room. That had always been my role. Prepare first, adjust first, soften first. But this time my mother, Daphne Mercer, didn't even let me audition for the part of the understanding daughter. What do you mean? I asked, even though I had heard her perfectly. On the other end of the line, she let out that slow, exhausted sigh she always used when she wanted me to feel difficult before I'd said anything at all. Vivian is pregnant, she said. She needs calm. I don't want drama in the house. I closed my eyes. Drama. That was the word she had chosen for me. My younger sister, Vivian, had a talent I used to think was accidental until I got old enough to know better. She could turn my existence into a problem. If she was upset, I was insensitive. If she was angry, I had provoked her. If she felt insecure, everyone had to shift, bend, rearrange, and reassure until she felt centered again. I was the only one in the family who never seemed to have the right to feel anything at all. Since when is me coming home for dinner considered drama? I asked. My mother paused for exactly 1 second. You know how emotional your sister is, she said. And things are good right now. I don't want anything disrupting the atmosphere. The atmosphere. I stared at the counter. That was when I understood, with the kind of clarity that hurts more than shouting ever could, that in my mother's mind, I was not part of the family atmosphere. I was the thing that disturbed it. I heard my father, Harold Mercer, call from somewhere in the background. Who is that? My mother lowered her voice. Alina. I'm explaining it to her. Explaining it to her. Not talking to my daughter. Not apologizing to my daughter. Not trying to work something out. Just explaining it to her, like I was a situation, not a person. 3 days before the holiday? I asked. You're telling me now? I'm telling you now because I just made the decision, she said. And I think you're old enough to understand. I looked at the gift bag again and felt something sharp and humiliating move through my chest. I had spent money and time and thought on people who had already decided they didn't want me in the room. You really didn't think about how this would feel for me? I asked. I waited. I waited for one decent line. One sentence that sounded like it came from a mother and not a manager handling a scheduling conflict. But all she said was, Alina, every time something becomes heavy, it becomes heavy because of you. I don't have the energy for that right now. Something inside me broke. Not cracked. Broke. Because in that moment I understood something I had been trying not to understand for most of my life. In my family, my pain was never treated like pain. It was treated like inconvenience. So I'm not welcome, I said. That's right. I wanted my father to say something. Anything. I wanted to hear him in the background object, ask to speak to me, tell my mother this was cruel, tell me I still had a place at the table. Instead, I heard distant dishes and movement and the sound of my father existing exactly as he always had, near enough to know, too weak to act. My mother's voice stayed steady. Stay where you are. This year the house just isn't available for you. Then she hung up.
No good vie.
I stood there staring at my black screen for a long time. Outside my window, bare branches scratched against the glass in the wind. The apartment suddenly felt too quiet, too honest. That wasn't the first time I had been pushed aside, but it was the first time they didn't even bother pretending I still belonged. I grew up in the Mercer house with one permanent assignment: be understanding. Vivian was 3 years younger, but she had always been the one the family moved around. If she cried, people rushed in. If she snapped at someone, she was stressed. If she wanted something, there was always an argument for why she needed it more. If I cried, I was sensitive. If I reacted, I was dramatic. If I wanted something, I was told to think bigger than myself. When I was 12, my mother bought Vivian a red dress because she had thrown a fit in a shopping mall. I stood beside them in a coat that was already too short at the sleeves, and my mother told me to let it go because your sister is more delicate. When I was 14, Vivian borrowed the bicycle I had saved for all summer and wrecked it. My mother didn't make her apologize. She told me not to make Vivian feel worse. Later that night, my father stood in my doorway for a full minute and said the line he used my entire childhood whenever he wanted to pretend helplessness was wisdom. You know how your mother is. He always knew. He just never did anything. When I was 18, I got into a good college 2 states away. I still remember standing in the kitchen with the acceptance letter shaking in my hands. My mother looked at it and said the timing wasn't right, the cost would put pressure on the family, and Vivian was going through a stressful year, so the household couldn't handle too much change. A few months later, Vivian was sent to a costly arts program because she said she needed a place to grow. I stayed home. I always stayed home. I was always the one expected to take up less room so other people could breathe more easily. So when my mother told me not to come home for Thanksgiving, the pain didn't come from that sentence alone. It came from every previous moment that had prepared me to swallow it. I sat down at my kitchen table and stared at the gift bag without touching it. Maybe 10 minutes passed. Maybe 40. My thoughts spun in old, familiar circles. Maybe I should call back. Maybe I should apologize. Maybe I should text Vivian and ask what she wants from me this time. Maybe I should make this easier for everyone. Those thoughts had governed my life for years. But that night, for the first time, another question cut through all of them. Why is it always me? I looked at the ceiling, eyes burning. I didn't know the answer. I just knew I couldn't stay in my apartment and sit there holding humiliation like a hot stone in my lap. So I changed clothes, put on my gray coat, tied my hair back, grabbed my wallet, and walked 15 minutes through the cold to a small restaurant downtown. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm. Large windows, cream-colored tablecloths, the smell of butter, herbs, and roasted meat drifting out to the sidewalk. From outside, it looked like the kind of place people with homes return to. I went in. The hostess asked, "Table for 1 or 2?" I almost laughed.
1.
She led me to a small table by the window. I ordered something warm without really reading the menu, took off my scarf, and looked around. Everywhere I looked, there were families. A little girl leaning against her mother's shoulder. A middle-aged man pulling out a chair for his wife. Someone laughing too loudly at a table of 7. A grandmother patting a teenager's hand. A large family near the center of the room talking over each other in the easy, overlapping rhythm of people who didn't have to wonder whether they belonged there. I dropped my eyes back to the menu, even though I had already ordered. When my food came, I tried to eat. I really did. But the first bite caught in my throat, so hard I had to put my fork down. I reached for water, blinked quickly, turned my face toward the window, and tried to hold myself together. I hated crying in public. I hated becoming a visible, lonely thing in a room full of people.
But some tears don't ask.
They slid down anyway onto the napkin, onto the back of my hand. In the reflection of the glass, I saw myself too clearly, a 27-year-old woman eating alone before a holiday because her own mother had decided she was easier to exclude than defend. I made a small sound that was almost a laugh. It hurt worse than crying. And then, just as I thought I would quietly finish and leave, a warm female voice spoke beside me. "Excuse me, sweetheart, would you like to sit with my family?" I looked up. A woman in her 60s stood beside my table, silver hair pinned neatly back, small pearl earrings catching the light. Her expression wasn't pitying. It was kind, steady, and oddly certain. At the long table behind her, a family had turned to look at me. I didn't know their names yet. I didn't know that my life was about to divide into before and after. But in that warm restaurant light, for the first time since my mother's phone call, I felt something open instead of close. And I had no idea that one empty chair at a stranger's table was about to lead me to the first real home I had ever known. I stared at her for a few seconds and couldn't answer. Not because I hadn't heard her, because I didn't know what to do with unconditional kindness. In my family, kindness was always attached to a price. It could be withdrawn if I said the wrong thing, reacted too honestly, took up the wrong amount of space, or simply existed at a time when someone else wanted me gone. So when a stranger looked at me with uncomplicated warmth and asked if I wanted to sit with her family, I genuinely didn't know how to respond. "I'm okay," I said automatically. "Thank you." She smiled the way older women do when they've raised children, survived bad years, and can recognize shame the second they see it. "No, you're not," she said gently. "And that's all right."
I'm Evelyn Hart.
"This is my husband, Samuel Hart." The older man at the head of the table rose halfway from his chair and gave me the kind of nod that immediately told you he meant what he was saying. "Come sit with us," he said. "No one should be alone tonight." I still meant to refuse. I really did. I meant to thank them, stay where I was, preserve what little dignity I felt I had left, and make sure my sadness didn't spill into someone else's holiday. Then a woman with chestnut brown hair at the far side of the table pushed out an empty chair and grinned. "We made too much food," she said. "Please help us before my father starts acting like leftovers are a moral failure." Laughter rose around the table. A dark-haired man in a navy sweater pushed a basket of hot bread toward the empty chair. "You don't have to explain anything," he said quietly. "You don't even have to talk much. But you can sit here." I looked at the chair. Then at my own table. My cooling meal. The glass of water. The damp napkin by my hand. Two worlds sat inches apart. In one, I stayed alone and swallowed the evening because I was too proud to accept comfort. In the other, I sat down with strangers who were offering me something for no reason except kindness. I hated feeling indebted. But I hated the idea of sitting by myself for another hour more. So I picked up my water glass and stood. "Just for a little while," I said. "I don't want to intrude." "You're not intruding," Evelyn said immediately. "You're just sitting down for dinner." There was something in the way she said it that landed right in my chest. No performance. No over-reassuring tone. Just fact. She introduced everyone slowly, like she understood I was already one breath away from feeling overwhelmed. "This is my daughter, Marissa Hart." Marissa waved cheerfully. "And this is my youngest, Julian Hart." The man in the navy sweater gave me a small nod. He had calm eyes. The kind that made you believe he wouldn't ask for anything from you before he had earned the right to. Samuel added, "Our middle son is with his wife's family tonight, so it turns out we had exactly one chair left." The table was bigger up close than it had looked from across the room. White tablecloth. Flickering candle. Bowls of mashed potatoes. Roasted turkey. Green beans. Cranberry sauce. Bread warm enough to steam when it tore open. It looked like every holiday table I had imagined my own family might become if I just kept trying hard enough. No one asked why I had been crying. No one stared. No one turned my pain into entertainment. They passed food, made room, and kept talking like I wasn't some wounded stranger disrupting their evening, but someone who had simply arrived late. Marissa told a story about her boss trying to make pumpkin pie and nearly setting the whole office oven on fire. Samuel insisted overcooked pie was still edible if you scraped enough off the top. Evelyn told him if he ever served a dessert like that in her house, she would make him eat the whole thing in the yard. Julian said the least, but every time conversations started overlapping too quickly, I noticed him glance my way as if making sure I didn't disappear at the edge of it. For the first 15 minutes, I mostly nodded and smiled. 20 minutes in, I started answering questions. 40 minutes in, I heard myself laugh, a real laugh, when Samuel admitted he once wore 2 different shoes to Marissa's school conference and didn't notice until another parent complimented his bold choice. The sound startled me. I couldn't remember the last time I laughed without immediately checking someone's face to make sure it had been allowed. Near the end of the meal, Evelyn leaned slightly toward me. "You don't have to tell us anything," she said softly. "But if you want to, I'm listening." I looked down at my plate. I still don't know exactly why I felt safe enough to say anything there. Maybe because no one had demanded a confession. Maybe because no one had tried to minimize me first. Or maybe because in just over an hour, this family had given me something I had almost forgotten could exist. A seat that did not need to be earned. "My mother called tonight," I said. "She told me not to come home for Thanksgiving." The table grew quieter, but not in that hungry, dramatic way some people do when they smell someone else's misery. It was quiet because they were making room. "My sister's pregnant," I continued. "Apparently, she doesn't want me there because I'll create drama." I gave a small, bitter laugh. "I know it sounds ridiculous. It's just one holiday dinner. I'm an adult." "It shouldn't." "It doesn't sound ridiculous," Julian said. I looked up. He held my gaze and said, very calmly, "Being pushed out by your own family on a holiday is not a small thing." That was it. Something in me gave way. I started talking. Not in a perfect order. Not as a polished life story. Just the truth as it came. I told them that my mother always chose Vivian. That my father always saw it and stayed silent. That when Vivian wrecked my bike, I was the one who got blamed. That when I got into a good college, the family suddenly couldn't afford change, but somehow could afford whatever my sister wanted months later. That I had spent years learning to speak less, ask less, feel less, so the people around me could remain comfortable. By the time I stopped, the candle on the table had burned lower. The restaurant had emptied out. But the heart stayed still, listening with the kind of attention that makes you realize how starved you've been for basic human regard. Samuel folded his hands. "There are people," he said slowly, "who care more about having the title of family than doing the work of being one." Evelyn didn't give me a speech. She just laid her hand over my wrist. "You did not deserve that." I had to blink hard. Because when someone has spent years being treated like they are too much, a sentence like that is almost unbearable in its kindness. "You did not deserve that." Marissa quietly slid the tissue box closer without making a show of it. Julian poured me more water. Samuel stood up and announced that anyone who had just told a story like mine needed dessert immediately, and if no one objected, he was ordering pie for the entire table. That broke the heaviness just enough. I laughed through tears. The others laughed too. When I finally stood to leave, I didn't know how to thank them. Every word I had felt too small. Evelyn solved that by pulling a clean napkin toward her, taking out a pen, and writing down her phone number. "We have dinner together every Sunday," she said. "Not because it's a holiday. Just because it's Sunday. If you ever want to come, you come." "I don't want to be a bother," I said, because old habits die hard. Samuel laughed. "You really love that sentence." Marissa smiled. "You haven't known my mother long enough yet. Once she decides she likes somebody, they're done for." "Correct," Evelyn said. "I'm very stubborn." We all laughed again. Julian walked me to the restaurant door. Outside, the cold felt sharper after the warmth inside. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets, breath visible in the night air. "Do you feel a little better?" he asked. I looked down at the napkin in my hand. "Yes," I said honestly. "I really do." He nodded. "Good." I took a few steps, then turned back. "Is your family always like that?" I asked. "Inviting strangers to dinner?" He smiled faintly.
No.
"Just when my mother sees someone trying very hard to look okay, when they obviously aren't." I laughed softly. "So, I'm not good at pretending." "No," he said. "Maybe tonight you just didn't need to." That sentence followed me all the way home. When I walked back into my apartment, the kitchen looked exactly the same. The gift bag still sat on the counter. The light was still dim.
The room was still quiet.
But something in me had changed. I wasn't standing in complete darkness anymore. Somewhere in the city, there was a lit table and a family who had made room for me without asking for proof that I deserved it. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a family group text. My mother had posted a photo from the holiday table. Vivian sat in the center, one hand over her stomach, smiling brightly. My mother was pressed close beside her. My father sat at the end of the table, wearing the same strained half-smile he always wore whenever something was wrong and he had decided not to challenge it. The caption read, "Wish the whole family could be together." I stared at it for a long time. A few days earlier, it would have destroyed me. Now, all I saw was performance. They didn't miss me. They missed the image of completeness. They missed the role I had always played, useful, accommodating, available whenever the picture needed filling out. Missing a role is not the same as missing a person. That Sunday, I stood in front of my mirror longer than necessary, changed shirts twice, picked up my phone and set it down again. Part of me still believed Evelyn's invitation belonged only to that one extraordinary, generous night. That if I showed up now, I would become awkward evidence that kindness had gone too far. Finally, I texted her. "This is Alina from the restaurant. If the invitation still stands, could I come tonight?" Her reply came back almost immediately. "Of course it stands. 6 o'clock. And don't bring anything." At 5:55, I was standing outside the Hart House holding a small box of pastries anyway. The windows glowed warm gold against the evening. Leaves covered the front path. I could hear laughter inside before I even rang the bell. I lifted my hand. And when my finger touched the button, I had no idea I was walking toward the first place in my life that truly had room for me. The door opened, and warmth rolled over me along with the smell of cinnamon, butter, and roasted vegetables. Evelyn stood there in a dark apron, a faint streak of flour on her cheek. Her eyes dropped immediately to the pastry box in my hand. "I told you not to bring anything." "It's a reflex," I admitted. "And they're small." "Fine," she said, taking the box. "Minor offense. Next time just bring yourself." Before I could answer, I heard Samuel call from the kitchen. "Is that Alina? Get in here before the stew disappears." I stepped inside. The Hart House wasn't polished in the stiff, staged way some homes are. It felt lived in. The couch cushions were soft. A sweater had been tossed over one armrest. Books were stacked 2 layers deep in a shelf by the fireplace. Family photos lined the mantel, not perfect posed portraits, but real moments, beach trips, crooked birthday cakes, graduations, children missing front teeth. In the Mercer house, photos had always felt like evidence. In the Hart House, they looked like memory. The kitchen was bright, loud, and alive. Samuel was slicing bread. Marissa was mixing a salad. Julian stood at the sink with his sleeves rolled up, drying glasses. "Can I help?" I asked because I had spent my life trying to earn my space by making myself useful. "Yes," Evelyn said immediately. "Sit on that stool and let me decide whether your sweater color is worth buying." Everyone laughed. I laughed too. And that was the first time I understood that some people know how to invite you into a family without making you feel embarrassed about having once stood outside one. That first Sunday dinner lasted nearly 3 hours. Not because anything extraordinary happened, just because that was how they lived. They ate slowly, talked over one another, argued about movies, passed dishes back and forth, teased without cruelty, let pauses exist without fear. In the Mercer house, dinner had always been an invisible performance. Watch my mother's mood. Track Vivian's needs. Time your words carefully. Stay alert. My father existed there like a man trying to carry a tray full of water without spilling, never asking whether the tray should have been carried at all. At the Hart table, dinner wasn't theater. It was life. Near dessert, Marissa asked me a simple question. "What do you like doing when you're not working?" I blinked. "Like hobbies?" She nodded. "Yes, unless you have a secret revenge list. In which case, I'd like to hear that too." Laughter rose around the table. I smiled, but something in me tightened. Nobody had asked me that in years. Questions like that belonged to Vivian in my family. What do you want? What do you need? What are you excited about? I got practical questions. Can you fix this? Can you take her there? Can you change your schedule? I like reading, I said slowly. And I used to paint. Used to? Julian asked. I shrugged. I haven't touched it in years. Because you stopped loving it? Evelyn asked. I looked into my tea.
No.
Because in my parents' house, anything that belonged to me always felt like the easiest thing to sacrifice when the family needed something else. The table went quiet in that gentle way I was beginning to recognize. Samuel tilted his head. Then it didn't die, he said. It was just starved. That thought stayed with me. When I left that night, Evelyn packed leftovers for me. Samuel walked me to my car, even though it was parked right outside. Marissa hugged me like there was nothing unusual about it. Julian once again stood at the gate with me before I left. You'll come back, right? He asked. I looked at the house. Kitchen lights still on. Evelyn moving through the window. Samuel bending to pick something up. Marissa laughing at something I couldn't hear. I think so, I said. He opened my car door. Good. That one word sounded like he meant it. After that, I came every Sunday. Then some Wednesdays because Evelyn made too much soup. Some Saturdays because Marissa wanted company while shopping. Samuel asked me to help him with paperwork. Julian gave me rides when I was too tired to drive. Little by little, I learned the rhythm of the Hart family. Samuel played old jazz records on weekend mornings. Evelyn covered the refrigerator with blue sticky notes. Marissa wrapped gifts like an event planner. Julian drank coffee far too strong, loved rainy weather, and had a rare kind of patience. He never stepped into anyone else's life too forcefully, but if you needed him, he was there. What unsettled me most was not their kindness. It was how consistent it was. They weren't only warm when I was visibly hurting. They were warm on ordinary days. On good days. On days when I didn't mention my family at all. I started to understand that some homes do not treat love like a reward. They treat it like flooring. Something everyone gets to stand on. Meanwhile, the Mercers contacted me the same way they always had. My mother texted, Vivian needs to borrow money for the baby. Send some if you can. No, how are you? No acknowledgement of Thanksgiving.
No apology.
Vivian texted, can you edit Ben's resume?
Urgent.
I didn't answer either one. Then my father called. My chest tightened when I saw his name, because old reflexes don't die the moment truth arrives. Alina, he said carefully, your mother says you've been acting strange. I almost laughed. Really? She means you're not answering messages. Did you call to ask how I'm doing? I said, or to remind me to respond when Mom and Vivian need something? Silence. I just want peace, he said finally.
Peace.
That word again. I looked out the Hart kitchen window. Julian was rinsing off the back steps after the rain. Have you ever noticed, I asked, that peace in our house was always built out of my part of it? My father sighed. You know how your mother is. I hung up. It was the first time I had ever ended the conversation first. That night, Evelyn took one look at my face and knew something had happened. Later, while everyone else drifted out of the kitchen, she asked softly, the old house again? The old house. Not your family. The old house. I nodded. You don't have to keep answering every time they reach for you, she said. I know, I whispered. It's just if I stop, it feels like admitting I don't really have a place there anymore. She turned fully toward me. Some truths hurt, she said, not because they are new, but because you finally stop looking away from them. A week later, Marissa dragged me into a stationery shop. While she searched for wrapping paper, I stopped in front of a watercolor set without meaning to. 12 small pans of paint in an old-fashioned tin. I just stood there looking at it. Marissa followed my gaze. You paint. Used to. She picked up the set and dropped it into her basket. I immediately protested. No, don't. Early birthday gift. My birthday is months away. I know, she said.
I'm impatient.
I took the paint set home and left it on my table for days without opening it. I was afraid of what I would find if I touched that part of myself again. Afraid it was really gone. Afraid I had abandoned too much of who I was trying to survive a house that had never wanted all of me anyway. The next Sunday, Julian came by with a book Samuel had wanted me to read. He noticed the paint set right away. So you got them back, he said. I haven't opened them. Scared. I gave him a dry smile. You're direct. I think you like directness, more than you admit. He was right. I'm afraid that if I open them, I said, I'll discover I'm not the person who loved painting anymore. He stepped closer and looked at the unopened tin with me. Maybe you're not the old version of her, he said, but maybe you're a better one. That night, after he left, I opened the paints. My hand shook when I touched the brush to water. The first colors were clumsy, gray-blue sky, weak yellow kitchen light, a blurry window. It wasn't good. It wasn't polished. But the longer I painted, the more I felt something deeply sad and deeply beautiful at once. Some parts of us do not die. They go quiet, and they wait for safe places to return. The hearts were giving me more than dinners. They were giving me pieces of myself back. And maybe that's what families like the Mercers never understand. When someone is neglected long enough, they don't just lose love. They start to lose the shape of themselves. It takes steady kindness to make the mirror clear again. By then, the chair at the heart table no longer felt like a temporary kindness. It was becoming mine. And then, on a rainy winter evening, with tea steaming between us and wind tapping at the windows, Evelyn Hart said something that changed the rest of my life. Winter settled in hard that year. The maple trees outside the Hart house went bare. The windows fogged at night. Samuel switched to stews and casseroles and called it civilized cold-weather living. Marissa wrapped herself in giant scarves and complained about winter as if it were a personal insult. And without noticing when exactly it happened, I began moving through their house like someone who knew where things belonged. I knew which drawer held napkins. Which mug was Samuel's because he swore coffee tasted better in it. That Evelyn hated knives being mixed in with spoons. That Marissa cleaned countertops in perfect squares when she was stressed. That Julian stepped outside for a minute whenever he needed to put his thoughts in order. That kind of familiarity arrived slowly, like snowfall. Light at first, then suddenly everywhere. At the same time, the distance between me and the Mercer house stopped being just emotional. It became practical. My mother still texted, but the messages had become almost absurd in how empty they were. Do you have a good lease template? What blender do you recommend? Do you know a decent pediatrician? No, how are you? No, I know I hurt you.
No, I'm sorry.
She called once, then twice, then sent a message. I don't understand this attitude. I stared at it and felt tired more than wounded. Tired in the way you get when you finally understand a locked door had been locked for years. One Sunday after dinner, when Samuel had gone upstairs and Marissa had gone out for ice cream, Evelyn asked me quietly, "Have you ever thought about cutting contact completely?" I stopped with a plate in my hands. Yes, I admitted. But every time I think about it, I feel cruel. Who taught you that? She asked. It was just useful to them. I leaned against the cabinet. But if I cut them off, I said, then I'm accepting that I don't really have a family. She shook her head gently.
No.
You're just stopping the mistake of calling a place that hurts you one. A small thing a few weeks later pushed me further than any big speech could have. It was my niece's second birthday party. I knew because my mother posted photos everywhere, balloons, tiered cake, matching decorations, captions about how family is everything. I wasn't invited. Again, that didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was the message Vivian sent a few minutes later. Send your share for the gift. I'm collecting money for her count.
No greeting. No fake worms.
Just a bill. I sat on my sofa staring at the text while one old, trained part of me immediately wanted to send the money just to avoid guilt, just to stay safe from being called bitter, petty, selfish. But another part of me, the part the hearts had been feeding back to life, didn't move. I typed 3 different responses. Deleted all of them. Then I sent one word.
No.
Vivian called immediately. I answered, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to hear what she sounded like when I denied her something. What is wrong with you? She demanded. That's your niece. I know. Then what does no mean? It means I'm not sending money. Silence. Then a sharp little laugh. You always have to make everything dramatic. There it was again. Dramatic. Too much. Difficult. I'm not making anything dramatic, I said. I just don't want to keep being treated like an open wallet every time your household needs something. Your household, she repeated.
Wow.
You really are talking like an outsider now.
Is het straight?
You made me an outsider a long time ago, I said. I'm just not pretending otherwise anymore. She went quiet, then sharpened. You think some random nice people can replace blood? I froze. I had never told her about the hearts. I still don't know exactly how she found out. Social media, mutual friends, somebody talking too much. But the fact that she knew made my stomach drop.
Don't talk about them, I said.
Oh, so it's true. That explains everything. Be careful, Alina. Strangers being nice to you for a while doesn't make them family. I hung up. My hands shook. Not because she was right. Because she had reached for the most precious thing in my life with the same old contempt, like anything beautiful that belonged to me could still be dismissed as fake, temporary, pathetic. That night I drove to the Hart house without warning anyone. Julian opened the door, looked at my face once, and didn't ask questions in the hallway. He took my coat, hung it up, and walked me into the kitchen. Evelyn was making tea. Samuel was reading. Marissa was painting her nails. All three looked up. No one said, "Why are you here?" No one said, "What happened now?" Samuel just asked, "Have you eaten?" That one question nearly broke me open. I shook my head. Evelyn ladled soup into a bowl. Marissa pulled out a chair. Julian set a glass of water beside it. Nobody pushed me to speak. When I finally did, I told them everything: Vivian's call, the line about blood, the way it hurt to hear her talk about this house like it was some sad fantasy I was clinging to. Samuel leaned back and said, "Funny how the people who treat you worst are always the first ones to wave the word blood around." Evelyn studied me for a long moment. "Do you know why that hurts so much?" she asked. I shook my head. "Because part of you is still afraid this can be taken away," she said. "You're afraid if you trust it too much, you'll be left again." I couldn't argue with her. She put the tea in front of me. "I can't promise life won't hurt you again," she said. "But I can promise you this. Real love does not make you wonder whether it still applies today." Much later that night, when everyone else had drifted off and only the low hum of the heater remained, I sat with Julian in the kitchen. "I don't understand why they can still hurt this much," I said, "even when I know exactly who they are." He sat across from me, both hands around his coffee mug. "Knowing someone hurts you," he said, "doesn't erase the fact that you love them, or the fact that some part of you still wanted to be chosen." I gave a sad little laugh. "That sounds pathetic."
"No," he said.
"It sounds human." I looked at him for a long time. Then I asked something I'd been afraid to ask. "Do you ever think I'm holding on to your family too tightly?" He frowned immediately.
"No."
"I mean it. So do I." He set his mug down. "You're not clinging. You're responding to a place that opened the door." That should have comforted me. Instead, it forced me to admit something bigger. I wasn't just a regular guest at the Hart house anymore. I needed that place in a way that went much deeper than shared meals. And what scared me even more was the possibility that they might need me too. A few weeks later, on a cold, rainy evening, when Marissa was out, Samuel was half asleep in front of the television, and Julian had gone to bring in more firewood, Evelyn asked me to come into her study. The room smelled like paper, lamp heat, and rain. A stack of documents sat on her desk beside reading glasses and a fountain pen. I sat across from her with my heart already beating too hard. She folded her hands over the papers and looked at me with serious gentleness. "There's something I want to ask you," she said. "But only if you're ready to hear it." The room suddenly felt very still. "Yes." She took a slow breath. "Have you ever heard of adult adoption?" And just like that, I knew my life was about to change again. For a second, I honestly thought I had misheard her. "Adult adoption?" I repeated. Evelyn nodded. I looked at her, then at the documents, then back at her. My mind flooded all at once: shock, hope, confusion, fear. One part of me wanted to ask if she was serious. Another part wanted to apologize for ever being the kind of person someone might feel compelled to rescue. "Why?" I asked, and immediately hated how small that sounded. Then something happened that startled even me. "Why would you think of that, Mom?" The word slipped out naturally. I froze the instant I heard it. But Evelyn's face softened in a way that made me realize maybe I hadn't been the only one hearing it long before it was spoken aloud. Because you are family, she said. I'm only asking whether you want the world to recognize it too. I turned my face away because my throat had closed. She didn't rush me. She explained everything slowly and clearly, with the calm of someone who had spent years in family law and knew exactly how much legal language should follow emotional truth instead of replacing it. Adult adoption was legal where we lived, as long as everyone consented and the requirements were met. It was often used in situations where the relationship already existed in every meaningful way and only needed formal recognition. I'm not asking because you need paperwork to be loved, she said. You don't, but some sacred things deserve to be named. I clasped my hands tightly in my lap. Why now? I asked. Her smile was small and sad and warm all at once. Because I think you're done standing in doorways. That sentence made me cry. Not loudly, just steadily, helplessly. Because she was right. My whole life had been lived in doorways. Not fully welcomed in. Not fully allowed to leave. Half inside, half outside, waiting for someone else to decide if I was permitted to stay. Samuel came into the room a minute later, took one look at my face, and sat beside Evelyn. You don't have to answer tonight, he said. And you don't have to say what you think we want to hear. But I want to be clear about one thing. I love you like my daughter. I don't say that casually. I lowered my head while tears slid over my fingers. I've watched you apologize for existing long enough, he said. I don't want you spending the rest of your life asking for permission to belong. Then Julian knocked and stepped inside with 2 mugs of cocoa. He saw the documents on the desk, then looked at my face, and immediately understood. So, you finally asked, he said quietly. I blinked at him. You knew? He smiled a little. For weeks. My mother threatened me if I said anything. I did not threaten you, Evelyn said. I merely made the consequences very clear. That made all of us laugh a little, which somehow made it easier to breathe. Julian came to stand beside me. I already thought you were family, he said. This would just make the truth official. I didn't answer that night. Not because I didn't want it. Because I wanted it so badly, I was afraid to touch it. What if I said yes and later found out it had only been a burst of emotion? What if I believed in this too much and was left again? That was always the oldest fear beneath everything. So I asked for time. For the next several days, the question followed me everywhere. Work, traffic, shower, sleepless hours. Every part of my life seemed to whisper the same answer. I already belonged to them. I had just never let myself say it out loud. Then my mother called from the Mercer landline. I almost ignored it. Something in me answered anyway. Alina, she said without greeting. Vivian says you've been spending time with some family. My shoulders went rigid. That's none of your business. It is if you're acting like strangers matter more than blood. I laughed once. Which blood? I asked. The kind that told me not to come home for a holiday? She went quiet for a second, then said the line that finally made something in me go cold. You're still holding on to that? You're an adult. That was when I understood with total certainty that the Mercers were never going to validate my pain if doing so required them to examine themselves. Why did you call? I asked. To remind you, she said, voice sharpening, that no matter who you spend time with, your real family is this one. Don't do something stupid you'll regret. The possessiveness in her tone made me feel sick. Goodbye, Mom, I said and hung up. That night, I went to the Hart House and told Evelyn, Samuel, and Julian everything, including the humiliating part, that some small piece of me felt disloyal, even considering saying yes. That despite everything, I was still afraid of becoming the villain in some story about ungrateful daughters and abandoned bloodlines. Samuel shook his head immediately. You are not betraying anyone by naming the truth, he said. You're just refusing to keep betraying yourself. Evelyn asked one question. If there were no blood ties in this story, she said, and this were another woman's life, what would you tell her? I sat there for a long time. Then I answered, quietly but clearly. I'd tell her to go where she's chosen. Evelyn nodded. A week later, I called her from my car during my lunch break. If the offer is still there, I began. There was one tiny beat of silence. Then I heard her breathe in shakily. It will always be there. I closed my eyes. Then I want it. On the other end of the line, I heard movement and Samuel's voice somewhere in the background. What did she say? Evelyn laughed through tears.
She said yes.
And just like that, sitting alone in a cold parking lot, I understood that sometimes people are born again not through pain, but through being chosen. The paperwork began soon after. Forms, declarations, meetings with another attorney to avoid conflicts because of Evelyn's background, questions about intent, capacity, understanding. Every signature felt both light and enormous. One afternoon, while filling out a section about my legal name after adoption, I froze over the line. Alina Mercer. That name had been on every report card, lease, contract, insurance file, and email account of my life. It had always been the official proof of who I was. But staring at it now, all I could see was the label of a house that had never really made room for me. Evelyn sat across from me, waiting without pressure. I can change my last name too, right? I asked. She nodded. I lowered my pen toward the paper. My hand shook, not because I felt sentimental, but because I understood what that small act meant. Changing my name wasn't just replacing letters. It was finally stepping away from a bridge that had collapsed years ago. I couldn't fill it in yet, but I would. And when I did, it would not be out of anger. It would be because the truth had finally become impossible to deny. The courtroom was much smaller than I expected. Not grand, not theatrical, just a quiet, bright room with a judge's bench, a few rows of seats, and the kind of silence that makes your own heartbeat sound louder than usual. I wore a dark blue dress. Evelyn adjusted my collar before we went in. Samuel asked me if I needed water every 5 minutes. Julian and Marissa sat behind us in clothes more formal than usual, but their faces were still theirs. Steady, warm, familiar. When my name was called, my knees almost gave out. Evelyn squeezed my hand once before letting go. It was enough. The judge was a woman in her 50s with calm eyes and a serious voice. She reviewed the documents and asked the formal questions. Did I understand that this would legally establish a parent-child relationship with Evelyn and Samuel Hart?
Yes.
Was I acting voluntarily?
Yes.
Had anyone pressured me into this decision?
No.
Did I understand the legal consequences of name changes and family status? Yes. At first my voice was dry. Then it steadied, because each question made the truth clearer. This was not a rebellion, not an impulsive emotional gesture, not a performance directed at the Mercers. It was the most honest decision I had ever made for myself. Then came the final question. Did you wish to change your surname to Hart? I looked down at the file. Then I looked up. Evelyn sat upright, hands folded, thumb moving slightly, the only sign she was nervous. Samuel looked at me the way he always did when he wanted to say it's all right without making me depend on the words. I heard myself answer.
Yes. Ido.
The room seemed to pause. The judge nodded, signed the order, and set her pen down with a tiny sound. That was it. One small sound. And an entire life changed. When we stepped into the hallway with the papers in hand, Samuel hugged me first. Welcome home, Alina Hart. I cried then, fully, messily, like a child who had finally reached the right door after years of standing outside in the cold. Evelyn held us both. Marissa laughed and cried at the same time. Julian waited until I stepped into his arms. When I did, he whispered, I like that name. So do I said. That night the Harts held a small dinner at home. No party. No public announcement. Evelyn made baked pasta, because it was my favorite. Samuel opened a bottle of wine he had been saving for a truly deserving reason. Marissa taped a handwritten sign to the refrigerator that said, Alina Hart, official. Julian gave me a small silver keychain engraved with 2 initials. A.H. For my new house keys? I asked. He shook his head. For any door you want to open from now on. We sat around the table late into the evening, and what made the night feel sacred was not grandeur, but normalcy. The conversation drifted into stories. Samuel complained about buying the wrong flower again. Evelyn rolled her eyes. Marissa mocked both of them. And I sat there hearing my new name in their voices and understanding, fully, that my place in that family was no longer something anyone could reduce or revoke. Over the next weeks, I began changing my name on everything: my driver's license, bank account, insurance, work forms. Each time I wrote Alina Hart, I felt a little strange and a little steadier. The Mercers said nothing. Or if they heard something, they chose silence. That didn't surprise me. My father called once and left a voicemail. "I think you should be softer with your mother and sister. They're still family." I listened, then deleted it. What stunned me wasn't what he said. It was how little power the words still held. I didn't shake. I didn't spiral. I just felt distance. That was when I knew I had already traveled far beyond the Mercer house. The years kept moving. Sunday dinners, holidays, birthdays, quiet routines, house repairs, small trips, long talks. The ordinary accumulation of being wanted. I stopped feeling like a guest who came often. I became the person with slippers by the door, a mug in the cabinet, belongings in the upstairs closet, and a place in every family photo. And in the middle of that life, another truth grew slowly and unmistakably. I fell in love with Julian. Not all at once. Not in one cinematic moment. It happened the way morning light fills a room. Gradually enough that you don't notice the beginning until the whole space is bright. I loved that he never asked me to justify my hurt. I loved that he stood beside me, without performing rescue. I loved the way he remembered tiny things. How I took tea, which hand got cold faster, when silence meant I needed company, and when it meant I needed space. I loved that he always left room for me to choose my own steps. The night we finally crossed from unspoken to spoken was during a storm. The power had flickered, and we all ate soup by candlelight like accidental campers. Later I followed him into the kitchen with the empty bowls. Rain battered the windows. The room behind us was dim. When I turned around, he was looking at me. "I think you already know," he said. "Know what?" "That I love you." I don't remember my first response exactly. Maybe a laugh. Maybe tears. Probably both. I just remember that when he kissed me, the world didn't explode. It went quiet. And inside that quiet, I had one clear thought. So this is what it feels like when something good finally reaches me. 5 years after the restaurant night, Julian proposed in the Hart backyard under string lights and the scent of lavender. Evelyn cried openly. Samuel insisted the wind was the reason his eyes were wet. Marissa recorded the whole thing while sobbing. I said yes. We started planning a small autumn wedding. Warm, elegant ours. I did not invite the Mercers. It wasn't impulsive. I thought about it for weeks. I half expected Evelyn or Samuel to urge me toward grace, caution, one last chance. They didn't. Evelyn only asked, "Do you want them there?" "No," I said. Samuel nodded once. "Then there's your answer." Simple. So simple I almost cried. Because I had spent my entire life believing every boundary required a defense speech. And the people who loved me most simply treated no like it was enough. I thought that would be the end of it. Then 1 month before the wedding, Marissa sent me a screenshot from a mutual acquaintance. Vivian had written that the Mercer family would obviously be there because blood can't be erased. I stared at the words until they blurred. They knew. And worse than that, they believed they still had the right to show up. I put my phone down, and for the first time in years, I felt the past walking straight toward me. I slept badly for days. Not because I was afraid they would come, because I knew how they would come. The Mercers didn't apologize well. They claimed position well. They would not arrive as people carrying shame. They would arrive as people who believed their role in my life remained self-evident no matter what they had done. That thought made me cold. One evening I sat at the Hart dining table with the seating chart spread out in front of me. Marissa was moving place cards around. Samuel reviewed menu options. Evelyn made notes for the coordinator. Julian watched me quietly. "We can stop them at the entrance," Marissa said. "You don't need to see them for 1 second." Julian looked at me and asked the question he always asked when it mattered most. What do you want? Not what's the proper thing to do. Not what will people think. Just, what do you want? I looked at the center of the main table.
Evelien Hart. Shamel Hart.
Parents of the bride. The answer inside me became suddenly very clear. They can come in, I said. Everyone looked up. Marissa frowned. You're sure? Yes, I said. I don't want a scene at the entrance. And I don't want them telling people later they were cruelly kept from seeing me get married. I paused. But they will not enter as family. Samuel lowered the menu. Where do you want them seated? And immediately I saw the old Mercer dining table in my mind. My place at the far end near the sink. Easy to forget. Easy to move. Easy to leave. Last row, I said. The room went quiet for one beat. Evelyn nodded first. All right. Marissa gave me a sad smile. That's kinder than they deserve. Samuel said, practical as ever. I'll make sure security is briefed. If they cause trouble, they leave. I expected to feel cruel after saying it. Instead, I felt relief. Because it wasn't revenge. It was simply refusing to let people who had abandoned me sit in a place they had never earned. The wedding plans kept moving. Dress fittings. Flower arguments. Music approval. Seating revisions. Contracts. Samuel debating with the caterer about chicken skin. Marissa acting like eucalyptus placement might determine the moral quality of the event. Evelyn reading every legal clause in every vendor agreement. And in the middle of all of it, I kept being hit by sudden waves of gratitude. Gratitude that I wasn't planning my wedding alone. Gratitude that Evelyn would be fixing my veil instead of the woman who once told me not to come home. Gratitude that Samuel would walk me down the aisle, the man who had chosen me through action instead of biology. Gratitude that parents of the bride would finally mean love and not just lineage. Then, 2 weeks before the wedding, my father called. Not a voicemail. A direct call. I stared at his name until Julian noticed my face from across the kitchen. It's him, I said. Julian only asked, do you want to answer? I did. Alina, my father said. His voice sounded rougher than I remembered. I heard you're getting married. Heard. Not I found out. Not congratulations. Just heard. Yes. I think, he hesitated. Something this important shouldn't happen without the family knowing. I looked out into the dark yard. Which family? Silence. You know what I mean. No, I said. You've actually never been very clear. The truth came out sharper than I meant it to. He exhaled heavily. I didn't call to fight. Then why did you call? I think your mother and Vivian should be there. It will look bad if people. I laughed once. Of course. Not remorse. Not love. Image. You're still the same, I said. Alina. All your life you've been the same. Worried about appearances, peace, what other people will think. Never about what I was actually living through. Julian set the tea down quietly, but didn't come closer. I know you're angry, my father said. But that was years ago. Don't bring old things into a happy day. That sentence exhausted me more than it hurt me. Old things. As if pain expires. As if enough time passing means the wounded person owes silence to the people who caused it. I'm not bringing it up, I said. It was never buried. Silence again. Then he asked, what if we come anyway? There it was. Not permission. A boundary test. I looked at my own reflection in the kitchen window. No longer the woman frozen in a tiny apartment with a dead phone in her hand. If you come, I thought, you don't come as parents. If you come, I said, you'll be treated like uninvited guests. Then I ended the call. This time, my hand didn't shake. The note to security became very simple. If the Mercer family appears, allow entry only with bride's approval. Seat them in the last row. Remove them immediately if they cause disruption. The night before the wedding, I stayed in Marissa's old room at the Hart house so we could all get ready together in the morning. I lay in bed listening to the wind outside and thought about the road that had brought me there. The phone call, the empty chair in the restaurant, the Sunday dinners, the documents in Evelyn's study, the new last name, the dress waiting on the closet door. I wasn't afraid of marriage. I was afraid of the past standing in the same room as the life I had built. But then I remembered what Evelyn had said months earlier. Real love does not make you wonder whether it still applies today. That was the truth I would carry into the next day. I already had a family. No one could undo that by showing up late and demanding front row seats. The next morning the sky was clear and almost offensively beautiful. Soft autumn light filled the room while Marissa worked on my hair and Evelyn fastened the tiny buttons down the back of my dress. "You okay?" Evelyn asked through the mirror. I looked at my reflection. "Yes," I said. And for once, I meant it. I didn't know that in less than an hour, the Mercer family would walk into my wedding venue without invitations, without shame, and still somehow believe their presence was self-evident. But they didn't know the most important thing. They were no longer entering my life as people with authority. They were coming only to witness what they had already lost. The greenhouse looked even more beautiful once guests began arriving. Morning light spread through the curved glass ceiling in a pale golden wash, catching on the white flowers and greenery lining the aisle. The whole place felt clean, luminous, almost fragile. In the bridal room, I stood at the window in my finished dress while Marissa adjusted the train for the 5th time and Evelyn fixed a pearl clip in my hair. When she touched my shoulder, I looked at us in the mirror and had to swallow hard. Once, I had imagined my biological mother standing in this place. But the ache had changed, because the woman behind me now had actually done the work of being my mother. "You're beautiful," Evelyn said. "Because of you," I answered. The moment held quietly between us. Then the coordinator knocked. "There are 3 guests here," she said carefully, "who are not on the list." The room went still. Marissa immediately said, "It's them, isn't it?" I set down my bouquet. "I'll handle it." Marissa tried to stop me, but Evelyn stepped forward first, took my face in both hands for a second, and said, "This is your day. No one gets to take it from you." I nodded. Then I walked out to the entrance hall. It was bright and open, with glass doors facing the gravel path outside. And there they were. My mother in a wine-colored dress chosen to draw attention. Vivian in pale cream just close enough to bridal white to feel deliberate. My father slightly behind them, looking older and more worn than I remembered. My mother looked me over from head to toe. "So you're really doing this," she said, "without inviting your family?"
No congratulations.
"No, you look beautiful." "Just accusation." "I didn't invite you," I said. Vivian gave a small mocking laugh.
Wow.
"You really want people to find out you hid your real parents from your own wedding?" I looked directly at her. "Couldn't find a less obvious color?" I asked. She blinked. My mother stiffened. "Don't speak to your sister that way on a happy day." "Whose happy day?" I asked.
Mine.
My father stepped forward half a pace. "Alina, I don't think we should make a scene. People are watching." Of course, that's what he noticed first. I turned to the security manager standing near the door. "They can come in," I said. My mother lifted her chin as though she had already won. Then I finished. "Seat them in the last row. If they disrupt anything, remove them." All 3 of them froze. "The last row," my mother repeated. "Uninvited guests sit where uninvited guests sit," I said. My father looked at me with something like disbelief. My mother lowered her voice in that sharp, furious whisper people use when they're trying to preserve dignity in public. "This is disgraceful. You're being ungrateful." That word used to shake me. Now it only made me tired. "What exactly is ungrateful?" I asked. "Not giving front row seats to the people who once told me not to come home?" Vivian rolled her eyes. "You're still obsessing over that? God, you love being the victim." "I'm not obsessing over it," I said. "I'm just not pretending it never happened." Security moved subtly closer. My father asked quietly, "Is this really what you want?" I looked at him, then at my mother, then at my sister. "No," I said honestly. What I wanted was never to be brought to this point. Then I turned around and walked back toward the bridal room. When I got inside, my hands were freezing. Marissa rushed toward me. "What happened?" "The same thing that always happened," I said. "It just doesn't work on me anymore." Evelyn took my hands and warmed them between her own. Well done. Those 2 words nearly undid me. Not because I wanted praise. Because for the first time in my life, after standing up to the Mercers, nobody asked me why I couldn't be softer, more polite, more forgiving. For once, I was just seen as someone who had protected herself. A few minutes later, the music started. Samuel, already in his suit, came to me and asked in the most Samuel way possible, "Do you still want me to walk you in? Because if you need me to throw someone out first, I can probably manage." I laughed. Everyone laughed. The tension broke enough to breathe. "Yes," I said. "I still want that." When the doors to the ceremony space opened, light poured in. I took Samuel's arm. Somewhere in the back row, the Mercer family was already seated like exactly what they were, uninvited witnesses. I walked into the greenhouse without looking for their faces again. At the end of the aisle, Samuel turned to me and said, "I'm very proud of you."
I blinked fast.
"I love you, Dad." Then he kissed my forehead and put my hand into Julian's. The ceremony itself felt almost unreal in its beauty. My vows came easier than I expected once I looked into Julian's eyes. His came with a voice that roughened halfway through because he was trying not to cry. The guests laughed, wept, clapped, and breathed with us. When we were pronounced married, I felt something inside me settle. Not explode. Settle. As if my life had finally clicked into place. But I knew the hardest moment wasn't over. Because after the ceremony came the reception. And in the reception was one part the Mercers had not prepared themselves for at all. The introduction of the parents. I had considered removing it from the schedule to avoid trouble. But eventually I understood that would only be another way of letting the past erase truth for the sake of comfort. The truth was simple. I had parents. They just weren't the people sitting in the back. So when the coordinator asked me quietly before the reception whether we were keeping the timeline as written, I looked at the line on the page. Parents of the bride, Samuel Hart and Evelyn Hart.
"Keep it," I said.
And I meant every word. The reception glowed with candlelight and warm conversation. Glassware shimmered. White flowers softened the edges of every table. Guests laughed more easily now that the ceremony was over. Julian and I sat at the main table facing Evelyn and Samuel. If I turned slightly, I could see the Mercers at a far table near one of the greenhouse pillars, placed exactly where I had wanted them, present, but not central. My mother looked furious. Vivian looked insulted. My father looked hollow. I turned back around. That night, I did not need to manage any of their emotions. After Marissa's speech, which somehow made the room laugh and cry within the same minute, the MC stepped onto the small platform near the dance floor. Before the bride and groom share their first dance, he said, "Let's welcome the people who loved, raised, and supported them." I felt the back of the room tighten before I even looked. The groom's parents were introduced first to warm applause. Then the MC looked down at his card again. My heartbeat sharpened. "And now," he said, "please welcome the parents of the bride." A tiny pause. Then, clearly and brightly, Samuel Hart and Evelyn Hart. Applause burst across the room. Evelyn rose first, elegant and calm. Samuel stood beside her, offering his arm. They stepped forward into the light and into public acknowledgement of something that had already been true for years. Then a chair crashed. My mother had stood so fast she knocked it over. "That's impossible." The entire greenhouse fell silent. The MC froze. Guests turned. Julian stood beside me at once, one hand low at my back. My mother stared at Evelyn like the world had just betrayed her. "You have no right," she shouted. "You cannot steal my daughter." No one moved. Samuel turned slowly toward her. His voice, when he spoke, was low and precise. "We didn't steal anyone." The room held its breath. Then he said the sentence that split the evening open. "You threw her away. We just opened our arms to what you never knew how to value." Silence. Real silence. Not the Mercer kind, the kind that covers things up. This was the kind that happens when truth finally gets said out loud in a room full of people who can hear it. My mother found her voice again first. "You know nothing about our family." Samuel didn't raise his. "I know enough. That is private." Yes, I said. My own voice came out stronger than I expected. It is private, and I lived inside it long enough to decide who belongs in my life. My mother rounded on me. You are humiliating me. I'm not humiliating you, I said. I'm just not protecting your image anymore. Vivian stood too. Oh my God, Alina. You really are obsessed with being the victim. One phone call, and you've turned yourself into a tragedy. I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see someone powerful. I saw someone spoiled so deeply by years of being centered that she genuinely believed her version of events outweighed my entire life. It wasn't one phone call, I said. It was a lifetime of being the person who could be removed so you could stay comfortable. She crossed her arms. Mom just wanted me calm while I was pregnant.
No, I said.
Mom wanted you comfortable no matter what it cost me. Like always. My mother took another step toward me. You cannot let strangers call themselves your parents and act like blood means nothing. That word again.
Blood.
The old leash. But standing there in my wedding dress, with my husband beside me and my chosen family in front of me, I finally understood something completely. Blood is only the beginning of a story.
It is not the whole thing.
I'm not denying where I came from, I said. I'm saying where I came from is not what made me whole. Vivian made a mocking face. You sound like a movie. No, I said. In movies, people usually apologize sooner. The line landed. A few quiet breaths shifted across the room. My mother turned to Evelyn. You knew she was my daughter. You had no right to interfere. Evelyn stood beside Samuel with her spine straight and her voice completely steady. I didn't interfere, she said. I refused to look away when I saw a young woman being abandoned by the people who should have protected her. My mother laughed harshly. Abandoned? She was fed. Educated.
Housed.
Samuel answered before I could. Providing food and school does not automatically make someone a good parent. That cut hard. Then, finally, my father stood, slower than the rest of us, as if every muscle in his body still belonged to the old instinct to preserve calm, even while shame dragged him in another direction. Daphne, he said hoarsely. Enough. She snapped toward him. Don't start. But he shook his head.
No.
This is enough. Vivian stared at him. Are you seriously taking her side? He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, he looked years older. I'm not taking sides, he said. I'm just not pretending anymore. The sentence dropped into the room like a stone. My mother was still trying to pull the narrative back into place. So, this is what you'll do now. Cut off your own mother because I protected your sister when she needed it? I looked at her for a long time. Then I said what I should have said much earlier. It was never one time, I said. You chose her for 27 years. Every time I was hurt, you called me too sensitive. Every time I needed something, you called it bad timing. Every time I took up space, you called it disruption. She opened her mouth, but I kept going. You pushed me out of meals, out of opportunities, out of belonging, out of holidays. You taught me that staying in the family meant becoming smaller and smaller until I was easy to ignore. And even now, what you care about most is not what you did to me. It's that people are hearing about it. Nobody in the room moved. Vivian tried once more. You're turning your wedding into an attack on the family. I looked at her. No, I said. You were the first one who stood up. She flushed. Then my father looked at me and said the words I had waited for most of my life. Alina.
I'm sorry.
And when those words finally came, standing there in a greenhouse filled with white flowers and wedding guests, I learned something painful. A late apology is not always relief. Sometimes it is emptiness. He swallowed hard. I saw it all. I knew your mother favored Vivian. I knew you were pushed out. I knew that call was wrong. I knew for years. His voice broke. And I did nothing. I saw Marissa raise a hand to her mouth. Evelyn laid one hand over Samuel's arm. I kept telling myself silence would keep the family together, my father said. But really, I was just a coward. My mother hissed his name, but he didn't look at her. I let you go through it alone. The old pain didn't erupt. It opened. like a locked room. 12-year-old me, 14-year-old me, 18-year-old me, 27-year-old me, holding a dead phone in a dim kitchen. He had seen all of them, and he had done nothing. Too much time had passed for that truth to heal what it might once have healed. But it was still truth. I stepped closer. Not all the way. Just enough. I believe you regret it, I said. He looked at me with desperate hope. Then, can you give me a chance? Every person in the room seemed to pause on the answer. I took one breath, then another, and I said, calmly, clearly, I accept your apology, but that does not mean I am letting you back into my life. My father went still. My mother looked stunned. Vivian stared. I looked at all three of them and said the sentence that should have come years earlier. Some doors close, I said, not because of hate, but because someone finally learns how to protect their peace. The words hung beneath the glass ceiling. My mother was the one who broke the silence. You cannot treat your parents like this. And with no warning, the sharpest answer of my life arrived. You taught me this yourself, I said. If someone isn't welcome, they shouldn't walk into someone else's home. She froze. And in that moment, I knew there was nothing left in me that belonged to their control. A different silence filled the room after that. Not shock this time. Recognition. Everyone understood now that this wasn't a misunderstanding at a wedding reception. It was the exposed center of years of pain, finally dragged into open light. My mother looked at me like she had never met me before. And maybe she hadn't. The woman standing in front of her was no longer the daughter who feared disappointing everyone more than she feared losing herself. I was no longer manageable through guilt. No longer available for emotional rearrangement. Vivian spoke next, but her voice wasn't as sharp as before. It trembled at the edges. You're blowing this up, she said. Do you have any idea what people are going to think? I looked at her. I had spent half my life trying to predict her moods, her wants, her jealousies, her reactions. I had bent around her like weather. And now, in this moment, she looked small. They'll think what they can see, I said. That some people only show up when it's time to claim a role, not when it's time to love one. She went red. I'm your sister. Yes, I said. And you used that as permission to treat me badly for years. She turned toward my mother, looking for a reinforcement. But my mother's usual certainty was cracking now. She could still reach for the old story. Difficult daughter, overreaction, manipulation, but too many witnesses were in the room, and more importantly, I was no longer cooperating with that version of myself. My father still hadn't moved. I don't expect forgiveness right away, he said. I don't want this to be the last time I see you. That hurt, but not in a way that pulled me back. Only in the sad, plain way late truths hurt. The way it hurts to realize something might have been real if someone had been braver years earlier. I understand, I said. He looked at me like those two words might save him. But understanding doesn't mean reopening the door, I said. You may be sorry. I believe that. But I cannot rebuild my life around your regret. His face crumpled slightly. My mother tried again. They've poisoned you against us, she said, voice rough with anger and humiliation. You really think a few years of kindness from strangers can erase your real parents? I turned to her. That may have been the last moment I ever looked at her primarily as the woman who gave birth to me. No one can erase the past, I said. But don't confuse the past with ownership. She stiffened. I am not something you get to put away and pull back out whenever you need to perform family, I said. I am a person. And I wore down in that house for a very long time. Evelyn stepped close enough then that everyone in the room could see what had already been true for years. My boundaries were no longer standing alone. Samuel stood beside her, steady and quiet. Neither of them shouted. They didn't need to. Their presence was proof. And, unexpectedly, I felt sad for my mother. Not the kind of sadness that made me want to return. The kind that comes when you realize someone was offered chance after chance to love properly and chose control instead. Chose image instead of tenderness. Chose the child who made her feel important instead of the child who needed protecting. And the cost of that choice had arrived on the day I wore a wedding dress and publicly called someone else my parents. "You should leave," Julian said then, calm and even. My mother snapped toward him, searching for somewhere else to throw her anger. "You know nothing. You're just—" "I'm her husband," Julian said. Not louder than she was, just firmer. "And this is our wedding." She's been very clear. My husband. The way he said it wasn't dramatic or possessive. It was simple.
Certain.
A wall closing gently against cold wind. And in that moment I understood something else too. The best revenge is not always making someone hurt the way they hurt you. Sometimes it is standing inside the life you built without them, whole, loved, peaceful, and letting them understand they are no longer central to it. The Mercers still existed in my history, but they no longer authored my future. The coordinator stepped closer. "We need you to leave now." My mother opened her mouth again, but even she finally seemed to understand the truth of the room. No one was coming to rescue her image. No one was telling me to be the bigger person. No one was looking at me like it was still my responsibility to smooth over damage I had not caused. At last she bent down, picked up her purse too quickly, and turned away. Vivian shoved back her chair. My father lingered for one more second. Then he looked at me and asked softly, "Are you happy?" I didn't answer immediately. I looked around the greenhouse.
The candlelight.
The flowers. Julian beside me. Evelyn's hand still resting lightly on my arm. Samuel standing like he would block any storm. Marissa near the front table, eyes shining, chin lifted with pride.
Friends.
Chosen family. Witnesses. People who were there not out of duty, but love. Then I looked back at him. "Yes," I said. That one word hit him harder than any accusation could have, because it confirmed the thing he had spent years refusing to face. I had become happy without the Mercer house. He nodded slowly. Then he turned and walked away. My mother, father, and sister were escorted out of the greenhouse in silence.
No screaming. No dramatic struggle.
No final attempt to pull sympathy from the room. And that silence became its own kind of karma. They had come expecting recognition. They left like nameless guests. No front row.
No ceremony.
No authority. The doors closed behind them, and something inside me went unexpectedly light. Not triumphant. Not gleeful.
Light.
Like a rope I had dragged behind me for years had finally snapped. The MC, to his credit, recovered beautifully after I nodded for him to continue. "Sometimes," he said into the microphone, "the strongest thing in a room is love that refuses to move." This time the applause came slowly, then all at once. Samuel started it. Evelyn followed. Then the whole room. Julian took my hand and led me to the dance floor. The lights dimmed. Music softened. I put my hand on his shoulder. He settled his at my waist. "Are you okay?" he asked. I leaned my forehead a little closer to him. For the first time in a long time, I whispered, "I really am." He kissed my hair. "I'm proud of you." And standing there in the dim gold light, moving gently in his arms, I understood that some endings don't need noise. They just need truth. By the time the reception fully resumed, something in the room had changed. It wasn't pity. It wasn't gossip. It was clarity. People no longer looked at me like the bride at the center of a dramatic interruption. They looked at me like someone who had survived a long war and had finally, very publicly, refused to go back. That mattered more than I expected. Because for years my family had relied on one assumption, that if they put enough pressure on me in public, I would fold. That I would protect appearances even when appearances were killing me. That assumption had died in that greenhouse. Marissa gave another speech later in the evening, shorter this time, less emotional and more sharp. When Alina first came into our lives, she said, smiling through tears, she acted like she needed permission to sit down, ask for things, or take up space. We learned very quickly that what she really needed wasn't permission. She needed people who wouldn't punish her for existing. The room went still again, but this time it was warm. Samuel followed with a toast that was exactly like him, plain, heartfelt, and impossible not to believe. "Some people are born into your life," he said, raising his glass. Some people arrive in it. What matters is who stays. Evelyn stood last. She held her glass in one hand, looked at me for a long second, and said, "A daughter is not defined by whose blood she carries. A daughter is someone you love, protect, and choose again and again. We chose Alina years ago. We are simply grateful she chose us back." I cried all over again. So did half the room. And maybe that was part of the karma too. Because while the Mercers had walked in believing biology gave them an unshakable claim, the people who remained in the room understood something better. Love is not a title. It is repeated action. Later that night, long after the formal moments were done, I slipped outside with Julian into the cool autumn air behind the greenhouse. The grass was damp. The string lights reflected softly in the glass walls. He stood beside me in silence for a while. Then he asked, "Do you feel guilty at all?" I thought about it carefully. "A little sad," I said. "Not guilty." He nodded. "That makes sense." I looked out into the dark garden. "For a long time," I said, "I thought if I ever stood up to them this clearly, I'd feel cruel, or empty, or terrified. And I feel." I let out a breath.
Free.
He smiled and tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. Good. That one word from him always did something to me. Maybe because he never used it carelessly. Never as filler. Never as control. When he said good, he meant he was happy. I had chosen myself. We stayed outside a little longer, then went back in to finish the evening with the people who had earned the right to be there. And that was the part one kept noticing over and over. The people who stayed in the room were the people who had shown up for me long before there was a dress, a reception, or a public moment to witness. That was the real answer to everything. Not blood, not titles, presence. Years later, when I thought back on the wedding, the most powerful image was never my mother standing up in shock. It was never Vivian's face. It was never even my father's apology. It was the image of the doors closing behind them. Because that was the sound of my life dividing cleanly, before and after. After the wedding, life did not suddenly become perfect in some glittering, unreal way. It became real. And that was better. Julian and I went on our honeymoon to a quiet lakeside town where mornings smelled like coffee and damp leaves. For the first time in years, I slept deeply. Not the kind of sleep that comes from exhaustion. The kind that comes when your body finally believes it no longer needs to stay on alert. One afternoon, wrapped in a blanket on a wooden balcony overlooking the water, Julian asked me, "Do you regret anything?" I thought about it for a long time. "Yes," I said finally. "I regret how many years I spent believing I had to endure mistreatment to earn love." He took my hand. "But you didn't stay there forever." I leaned against him.
No, I said.
I didn't. When we came home, we moved into a small house with a sunny kitchen and a backyard that smelled like lavender in the summer. Not huge, not fancy, just ours. On moving day, Samuel insisted on carrying the heaviest boxes even though his back complained. Evelyn brought enough food for 10 people because she knew we would forget to eat. Marissa hung temporary curtains and insulted our wall color in the same breath. No one asked if they were welcome. They were family. Family just comes. Years passed. Julian and I built a life that was not perfect but was steady. We argued about ordinary things. We forgot groceries. We laughed over burnt dinners. We had bad days and quiet days and long days. Sometimes old memories returned out of nowhere, usually around holidays. Once, while helping Evelyn set the table for Thanksgiving, the smell of turkey hit me so hard I had to stop moving for a second. She didn't ask if I was still on that. She just handed me the bread knife and gave my hands something to do while my heart caught up. That was the difference between my old family and my real one. The hearts never demanded that I heal quickly for their comfort. They let me have difficult days and loved me straight through them. A few years later, I gave birth to a daughter. When the nurse placed her on my chest, her tiny hand curled around my finger. Julian stood beside me, crying and smiling at once. Through the narrow glass in the hospital door, I saw Evelyn holding Samuel while both of them wiped tears from their faces. We named our daughter Elena Hart, not to erase the past, not to make a statement, just because that name had become the greatest gift I had ever been given. I wanted my daughter to grow up inside a name that never made her wonder whether she was welcome. The Mercers tried a few times over the years to touch the closed door. A letter through an old acquaintance. A short holiday text from my father. "I hope you're at peace." I never replied. Not because I wanted punishment. Because I had finally learned that peace does not require reopening yourself to the people who once fractured it. Forgiveness, if it lived anywhere, lived inside me, so I didn't have to carry the weight every day. It was never an invitation back in. My mother never gave a real apology. That stopped surprising me. Some people would have to dismantle their entire identity to apologize honestly, and not everyone is brave enough for that kind of destruction. Vivian, from what little I occasionally heard through mutual connections, continued living like she was still the center of every emotional weather pattern around her. By then, the news passed through me like traffic sound. I didn't hate her anymore. I simply didn't need her. That was freedom. Years after the wedding, on one completely ordinary Sunday evening, the whole Hart family was crowded around the table again. Elena sat in her high chair banging a spoon and laughing. Samuel was retelling an old story, this time with even more exaggeration. Marissa had arrived late carrying pastries and complaints about work. Evelyn was scolding Julian for cutting vegetables unevenly. The room smelled like soup, butter, bread, and cinnamon. I sat there looking around at all of them and suddenly remembered the tiny table in the restaurant where this all began. The one where I had sat alone, trying not to cry, convinced I had nowhere left to go. If I could speak to that version of myself now, I know exactly what I would say. I would tell her that losing the place you were born does not always mean losing your chance at home. I would tell her that sometimes the worst pain opens the door to the best thing. I would tell her that one day she would stop flinching when her mother's name lit up her phone. I would tell her that one day she would walk down an aisle, hear someone else introduced as her parents, and feel no guilt at all, only truth. I would tell her that one day she would have a daughter carrying the name of the people who chose her. And I would tell her that one ordinary evening, surrounded by soup and laughter and people arguing over nothing important, she would realize she no longer lived in the shadow of being unwanted. So, if anyone listening to my story has ever been made to feel like a burden by the very people who should have protected them, hear this. Family is not always where your DNA matches. Family is the place where someone pulls out a chair and says,
"Sit down.
This place is yours." And sometimes the greatest victory is not making the people from your past regret what they did. Sometimes it is becoming strong enough to look at the life you built from real love and say,
Thank you.
"But I already have a home."